to Seminars at Steamboat. I'm Joella West, Seminars Chair. With this event, we begin our 18th season. If you've been part of our audience season after season in our live venue, or if you're finding us for the first time, thank you for joining our great migration to the cloud. Our board planned this season last summer. By the end of 2019, we had commitments from speakers and dates booked at our wonderful venue, the Springs Pavilion. Our board was feeling pretty happy for a few weeks. Then, of course, everything changed. And by May, it was clear that our choices were to either abandon the season or figure out how to create a virtual experience that would be as close as possible to the in-person events that our audiences loved. So, here we are, for this season, not inside the Springs Pavilion, but ready to begin the new adventure. Many people have made this possible. Our all-volunteer board, with special mention to Jenny Lay and Ken Spruill, who have done all the legwork to enable us to make this transition. Our speakers, who amid the chaos of 2020, have kept us on their calendars and adapted to this format. We're grateful for financial support from Bell Sawhill and Yampa Valley Community Foundation and from our anonymous supporters. Thanks also to everyone who has made contributions so that we can continue our mission to offer these talks free to the public. And special thanks to tonight's sponsors, Tony and Emily Seaver, and supporting sponsors, Rex and Shireen Jones. If you are able to make a donation, you can do so at any time during this talk by clicking on the light green bar at the bottom of your screen. If you would like to watch this talk again later, or view a past seminars talk, you can do so on our website, seminarsatssteamboat.org. KUNC, Community Radio of Northern Colorado, will also have this season's talks available on their website at kunc.org's Seminars Podcast landing page. As you listen today, you can submit any queries for the speakers by clicking on Ask a Question at the bottom of your screen. Our speaker today is Amy Walter, and here to introduce her is former board member Jane Stein.
Thank you and welcome to everyone. It is a pleasure to introduce Amy Walter as seminar speaker again. Last year, she was one of our most popular speakers when she talked about the state of play, the 2020 election. This year, with less than 4 months to go, her topic has a new spin, the 2020 election in the time of the pandemic. She brings a breadth of knowledge to the issue as someone who has covered presidential elections for more than 20 years. As a political analyst, Amy has a proven track record for accurate, objective, and insightful forecasting. She is trusted and respected by both Democrats and Republicans in D.C., which is not an easy feat, and was named one of the top journalists in town. She is the national editor of the Cook Political Report and former political director of ABC News. She is known to many of us for her regular gig with Tamara Keith on Monday night, the PBS NewsHour. She is also the host of WNYC's The Takeaway, Politics with Amy Walter, and is a regular on NBC's Meet the Press, CBS's Face the Nation, and Fox News Sunday. She loved being in Steamboat last summer, as did we love having her here, and had plans to be here with her family to ski in the winter. But of course, the pandemic changed all of that. Instead, we have Amy Walter live but distant from Washington. Please welcome her with a virtual applause.
Thanks, Jane. And I do desperately wish I could be in Steamboat right now. Jane and Bob convinced, well, maybe they didn't have to work that hard to convince me last time around that I would love Steamboat. And sure enough, we fell in love with it. My entire family fell in love with the place. And we really do hope to get back there very soon to enjoy everything about Steamboat that I'm so incredibly jealous that you guys get to look out your window and see at this very, very moment. The other interesting, maybe the silver lining here, Jane, is the fact that actually today I would not be able to be in Steamboat because I would be in Milwaukee. This was supposed to be the start of the Democratic National Convention. That has been bumped until August, and it's going to be mostly virtual, as we don't know what the Republican convention is going to look like, but I suspect a lot of that's going to be virtual as well. So we're here with the times. Let's start by just taking a 30,000 foot view of where we are politically. And I'm going to give about 30-minute overview, dip in a little bit to some specifics, but if you're looking for me to sort of drill down a little bit more, that's going to happen in the Q&A. So in just this short amount of time, I'm going to get in as much as I can to just give everybody a taste of what we think is to come for the 2020 election. So when I last spoke with you, one of the things that I had mentioned then, and I'd been talking about really up until February, March, was these two sort of distinct forces that seemed opposite, but were playing in concert in the political atmosphere. And that's chaos and consistency, right? They shouldn't be so neatly woven together, but they had been. And let me explain what I mean by that. We know that this is a president unlike any other we've ever seen. You type in the word Donald Trump and you get precedent busting, unorthodox. Most of what he does and acts are ways that nobody had ever seen before. Now, there are a bunch of people who really dislike that and a bunch of people who really like it. But what we have seen is that overall there has been sort of a built-in range of approval ratings for this president that started very, very early. And that's where the consistency piece comes in, despite everything that had happened up until this point. And think about all of the things that in any other year would have been what we would consider like maybe altering the course of the presidency, or president ending, or president defining, or maybe this locked in the election for the president. They seem to have little impact on perceptions of this president. So there was good and bad news for the president on this. The good news is when even when things were bad as they could get, which was a lot of 2017. Remember, that was all the chaos in the White House. You had the turnover there. You had the debate starting at the very beginning about whether the crowd size was accurately captured by the media. Move into the controversy over the white supremacy march in Charlottesville, the failure of the healthcare bill, and the president was looking at some of the worst numbers of his presidency, somewhere around 38, 39%. But they never got worse than that. There was always a floor there. So even when things were really, really bad, including the fact that the president of the United States, this wasn't that long ago, I know it seems like a million years ago, but the president of the United States was actually impeached and his approval rating didn't budge. It stuck right around 42, 43%. The bad news, of course, is that when things were going well, and that's especially true of the economy, even when the economy was breaking all kinds of records, both in the consumer support of the economy, the optimism of consumers about the economy, the GDP number, the unemployment number, that didn't bump the president up all that much either. The highest approval rating he got was around 48%. And this president is still the first president in the history of Gallup polling never to reach a 50% approval rating. So even within all the chaos, as I said, the president's approval rating ranged somewhere between 48 and 38%. Now, that's not a great place to be for a president, which, again, even before COVID hit, he was hovering somewhere around 43, 44, some cases hit 45% job approval rating. It was going to be very difficult for him to win re-election with those kinds of numbers. And I also really pointed to one of the biggest challenges for this president was that he never took an effort to expand the base that elected him in 2016. We know he got 46% of the popular vote. We know that he narrowly carried the Electoral College thanks to very small margin of victory in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. But his entire presidency has really been about keeping that base happy and intensely engaged, which is why he's had such a strong floor, right? The base hasn't ever abandoned him. But it also meant that it set in that ceiling, that he wasn't bringing in new voters. And so what it was going to require from him was really turning out every single voter who could possibly be in the category of someone who was at least open to the president, keeping his base, and then finding people that looked like his base to come out and vote for him, because he was unable to get new voters into the mix. The theory then, again, pre-COVID, was that the president was going to be able to build on this base, again, not by bringing new people in, but by turning out people who hadn't previously even been engaged in the 2016 election. I mean, if you remember in 2016, it was Hillary Clinton who had the well-oiled machine. She had the money, she had the infrastructure, she had the experienced campaign staff. Donald Trump had gone through multiple campaign managers. The campaign was sort of held together with duct tape and baling wire, and he still pulled out a win. Now he's had 4 years to prepare for this, and what looked like the likely path for the president was, once again, to maybe lose the popular vote. In fact, it was likely he'd lose the popular vote, but still win the Electoral College vote by turning out voters, especially in states like the Midwest, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, maybe even Minnesota, by targeting, spending the years that the campaign had the time now to spend to find those voters, the years that the president was the president, and there was not a Democratic nominee, to find voters who fit into sort of like the stereotype of a Trump voter. And in places, as I mentioned, those Midwestern states, the non-voter, the people who didn't show up in 2016 look a lot more like your kind of traditional Trump voter than a Biden voter. My colleague, David Wasserman, crunched the numbers, and what he found was, if you look through a state like Wisconsin, for example, of the people who didn't vote in 2016, 64% of them were white and non-college. Now, not all of those people are going to be Trump voters. Not all those people are going to come out and vote. But that's a much bigger pool for him, for the president, to fish from than the percent of non-white voters who didn't show up in 2016, which is about 20%. So the pool was bigger, so he wasn't going to get it deeper, but he was going to expand it and theoretically pull out yet another narrow win in those states. But obviously, things have changed. That's why I'm here instead of there. And COVID hit. And you don't have to be a historical, or you don't have to be a political analyst or know much political history to understand that crises make and break presidents. And that this president was handed, he didn't ask for it, wasn't his fault, but a crisis came onto his plate. And at this point, majority of Americans believe he hasn't handled it well. And if you want to look just at immediate history for how crises make and break a president, you look at the George W. Bush administration. Coming into September of 2001, the president, George W. Bush, that is, much like this president, had a very contested election. He did not win the popular vote. And of course, there was still very much of a discontent, especially among Democrats, about the way that the final decision on who won the Electoral College was handled by the Supreme Court, of course. So George W. Bush went in early September, had something like a 51% approval rating, which is fine. Not great, but fine. After the attacks on 9/11, his approval rating skyrocketed, as we all know, up into the 90% range and really stayed into the 60% range all through 2002. The party made gains in the 2002 election. And I'd argue that the residue of that 9/11 response in 2004 is what made George W. Bush successful in that election. That even though voters were souring on the war, the economy was starting to soften, his response to that crisis did help to insulate him even in bad times. Now we're in the middle of a crisis where, as I said, more than 50%, it's closer to 60% of Americans say they disapprove of the way that the president is handling this crisis. A Pew poll out the other week showed that Joe Biden had an 11-point advantage on who voters trusted to handle the coronavirus pandemic. And on the other issue that's roiling America right now, race relations, police violence, Joe Biden also has a pretty hefty lead. In this Pew poll, it was 13 points. So again, you don't need to be the most plugged in political observer to appreciate the fact that the president is struggling right now, in large part because the country is struggling and they don't at this point see that he has met this moment. What we see now is a president whose approval rating is still within that range that I talked about, that 48 to 38% range, but it's on the lower end of that range. His approval rating right now is 40.5% on average. He's losing to Joe Biden in the national polls by a little bit over 9 points. Again, if you average all the national polls that are out, he's losing, the president's losing in pretty much all of the key battleground states, including Florida, which is a firewall. I do not see how the president wins re-election without winning Florida. So this sets up for a really, really terrible re-election for President Trump. And I know there may be some of you or a lot of you who are saying, I don't know, it feels like we've been here before. 2016, didn't the poll show that Hillary Clinton was going to win big? Didn't the poll show that people didn't like Donald Trump? Didn't the poll show that he was losing in all of those key states? And then look what happened. And that is a fair question and a very fair, it's a very fair way to ask about what's different this time than in 2016. The first thing, as I pointed out at the very beginning, the first thing that's different, of course, is that Donald Trump is no longer the challenger. He's not the outsider. He's not the disruptor. He's not the person that's coming in to change after 8 years of one party in charge. Instead, he is the person in charge. And it is very difficult when you are the incumbent party in a time of crisis, when people are frustrated and angry, to change perceptions of yourself in the way you can when you're a challenger or when it's an open seat contest, right? This isn't my administration. I would do things differently. I didn't pick X, Y, and Z options. This other person did, right? You can't do that when you are the incumbent in office. So that's, of course, the most important piece of it. The second is that Joe Biden is not Hillary Clinton. And that's obvious for a number of reasons. But most important is the fact that Joe Biden is seen much more favorably at this point in the campaign than Hillary Clinton was at this point in 2016. Back around this point in 2016, the favorable, unfavorable ratings for Hillary Clinton were -20. Not surprisingly, for President Trump, they were even a little bit worse at -23. Well, he was then candidate Trump, -23. Joe Biden is at -4. It's not a great number, -4, but it's a lot better than -20. Now, the Republicans and the Trump campaign argue that they still have enough time to turn Joe Biden into Hillary Clinton, to drive up those negative ratings. But again, it's going to be more difficult to do than it was for Hillary Clinton because, A, people are much more focused right now on what the sitting president is doing than what his challenger is doing because we're in the middle of a pandemic, an economic crisis, and a racial reckoning. So that puts the spotlight on Donald Trump much more so than it is on Joe Biden. Second is it's just really difficult to turn Joe Biden into many of the things that hobbled Hillary Clinton. Yes, he's been in Washington for many, many years, longer than even the Clintons were in Washington, but he doesn't have the baggage that came with being a Clinton, all the controversies, all the conspiracy theories, and it's just not believable to try to tie him into that. It's also not believable to try to turn him into some sort of left-wing Bernie Sanders liberal. Look, Republicans earlier this year were ecstatic in seeing the kind of support and the success that Bernie Sanders was having. And had Bernie Sanders been the nominee, we would probably be having a very different conversation right now. But he's not, and Joe Biden is not. And at every opportunity to break from Bernie Sanders or from folks on the left, Joe Biden has taken it, whether it is on everything from defunding the police to taking down statues of founding fathers to breaking up big tech. Even on taxes, Joe Biden is not saying that he is going to bring corporate taxes back to the level they were before the Trump tax cut. They're going to be raised, but he's not completely, he's not raising them to the 2016 levels or higher. He's not talking about breaking up big tech. This is somebody who's going to be very difficult to peg as too far left. Now, what you see instead the president doing is arguing that Joe Biden will be a puppet of the left. He's not all with it. He's senile. He's old. He's sleepy, and he's going to be taken advantage of by Nancy Pelosi and AOC and Bernie Sanders and the others on the left. As of now, that really isn't getting a whole lot of traction. The other challenge in making Joe Biden, making this race really a referendum on Joe Biden instead of a referendum on Donald Trump, is that Donald Trump doesn't like ceding the spotlight. He likes being the center of attention. And when you are trying to make the other person the focus, you have got to step out of the way. You've got to let the ads or the media attention go onto your opponent. And of course, it helps that Joe Biden doesn't have a lot of public events. There's no convention today, for example. He got a very big break by not having a long, drawn-out primary process. He has been able to make sort of selective speeches, selective press availability. All of that is working in Joe Biden's favor, and he seems to be really, when you talk about somebody kind of getting good breaks at every part of the campaign, every stage of the campaign, Joe Biden definitely fits into that category. Look, it puts a lot of pressure, though, on Joe Biden to do two things really, really well. His vice presidential pick has to be something that the rollout has to be really strong. The support from the base has to be strong. The press reaction to it has to be good. All of that has to go very, very well. There's not much room for error there because, again, for most voters, they haven't seen Joe Biden at all. This is their first opportunity to see how this person would be as president. Well, how do they make their decisions? What are the kind of people that he wants around him? How did he make this choice of this person? What is this person? What does she say about him? And I think it's obvious that he's going to pick woman. And the second thing that has to go very well are these debates. We know there are 3 of them set up right now. Theoretically, they're taking place at college campuses. I'm skeptical that that's going to happen. I know that the media is not going to be interested in showing up and sitting in a big spin room crowded in with lots and lots of other people. I'm sure the candidates don't want to be doing that. I'm sure the universities don't want to have lots of people crowded in to their campus, especially people from off campus in their stadiums, or it's not really stadiums, but the stages that they're going to set up for the debate. So I would suspect that you're going to have debates that either are without audiences, or at the very least, a very curated kind of experience with not as many people as we're used to seeing. But Joe Biden does need to be able to come out strong in that first debate, which, yes, it's the 29th of September will be that very first debate. That's where most people are going to tune in. Again, they will not have seen much of Joe Biden. They will have heard from Trump and his surrogates for months that Joe Biden's not up to the challenge. And so he's got to be able to prove them wrong, show that he can, play at this level and for a significant amount of time. Now, for those of you who might have watched the early Democratic primaries, especially those from last summer, Joe Biden didn't look so great. He was very out of practice, rusty. He looked at points like a man standing on an icy parking lot where you wondered if he was going to be able to hang on, right? Sometimes the sentences got cut up in half. He seemed to have a hard time as the questions were going from person to person down the stage, and there were lights blinking and people telling him his time was up. He got a little bit better as the campaign went on, and then particularly, I thought he did his best job in the debates when he was one-on-one with Bernie Sanders. But that's where I think he's going to have to really show that he's up for the challenge. The other question is whether Donald Trump, this big hole, this deep hole he's in, down 9 points, approval rating 40%, is there any way that he can get out of this besides making Joe Biden a less acceptable alternative? I mean, the most obvious answer would be that there's a vaccine, that COVID gets under control by the time we hit the fall, the economy comes roaring back, kids are in school, and everything's back to normal. But that seems highly, highly unlikely. The other thing that people sometimes raise is, well, what if the economy looks better, like the trajectory is going in the right direction? Even if it's not a V-shaped recovery, maybe at least it's going in the right way. It's not going back down. And that's certainly a fair argument. My thought on that, though, is that even when the economy was really good, as I said, the president was unable to translate that to votes, translate that into stronger job approval rating. Ron Brownstein, who many of you may know, he's a CNN commentator. He writes for The Atlantic. He's looked at presidential performance in the most previous presidents, Obama and Bush, and voters' views on the economy. And what he found is, again, this won't surprise anybody, but when the economy's looking good and people who think the economy's looking good, those people reward the sitting president. And for both George W. Bush and for Barack Obama, 90% of the people who said they thought the economy was excellent or good ended up voting for, sorry, the dog is now let in the room. I'm sorry about that. Ended up voting for Barack Obama or George W. Bush. In the polling taken before we had the COVID crisis, what we found was that Donald Trump was getting just 55% of those voters who said the economy was excellent or good. So you had a number of people who thought the economy was doing really well, but who also were not willing to commit to voting for Donald Trump. So that was already a problem. And I think the weight of where we are right now is going to be too difficult to think we could ever get back to something that looks like a really strong recovery going into the fall. Before we open it up to questions, I just wanted to talk about two other important federal contests. Of course, the race for the Senate, the race for the House. The race for the House is a lot easier because there's not going to be, at least I don't see that, there is going to be a change in the majority status when it comes to the House. I think right now what we're seeing is that we have, for the most part, what we know is that Democrats are poised right now to hold on to their majority. They may even be able to grow their majority. In the Senate, and if they lose seats, it's just a couple of seats, so they keep their majority there. It's really the Senate where the battleground will be taking place. Of course, Republicans now are in the majority in the Senate. For Democrats to take control of the Senate, they would need to pick up 3 seats and the White House, so that would give them 50 seats, net 3. That would give them 50 seats. The vice president would break a tie. Now, we know that Democrats are somewhat on the offense this year, unlike 2018 when they were really on the defense. They only have one of their seats, Democrats that is, in real danger, and that's Alabama with Doug Jones. So let's just say they lose that seat. That means that they would need to get 4 seats in order to get a bare minimum, right, to be able to net the bare minimum for a majority. And right now, Colorado is one of their top, for Democrats, one of their top pickup opportunities, in large part because of how unpopular the president is in Colorado. Maine is another state. It's a state that Hillary Clinton won, narrowly, but won. And there you have Susan Collins, who is fighting for her political survival. Arizona and North Carolina are 2 of the other races where Democrats feel pretty confident. They don't believe that they have North Carolina in the bag or anything, but they feel very confident about Arizona. But between, if Democrats just win those 4 states, there you have control of the Senate flipping to Democrats. That's a very believable option at this point. And what is really starting to change, and as we've seen, the president's numbers really start to disintegrate as the gap between Biden and Trump widens nationally. Well, it means that the president is sinking even in states where not that long ago he looked pretty strong, like Iowa or Montana. And in the states where he was already going to be struggling, like in Arizona or a Colorado or a Maine, the gap is even bigger. And so what Democrats have been able to do, Georgia, what Democrats have been able to do then is expand the playing field, to put more states in play. Georgia, Iowa, maybe Kansas. I don't want to go into the weeds on that one, but Montana certainly. And so they have an opportunity potentially, if this election is a big enough, if there's a big enough wave there, to not just get a bare majority, but actually to pick up, 5 or 6 Senate seats and get a 51, 52 seat majority. It's not enough, of course, to stop a filibuster. Need 60 seats for that, but it's a little bit of a padding. The final thing I wanted to just touch on before we get to questions is, I think, something that we have to all be very aware of as we come into this election, and that everything about this moment that we're in is unlike anything we've ever seen before, most specifically the way that we vote, how we vote. If indeed we are still in the middle of this pandemic in the fall, which many expect that we will be, and it could even be buttressed by flu season that hits some states even doubly hard, more and more voters are going to want to use vote by mail as their option for casting their ballots. And here's what we know about that. Almost every one of the battleground states, but for Texas, allows voters to submit an absentee ballot without excuse. So you don't have to tell people in the registrar's office why you would like to get an absentee ballot. You get it no matter what. But we also know a couple of things. The first is there are lawsuits going on in a lot of these states about the ways in which voters are going to be able to get those ballots. In some states, the Secretary of State has said, like in Michigan, for example, we are sending out applications to every registered voter. In other states, like Iowa, the Secretary of State is not doing that, but individual jurisdictions are doing this. So maybe if you live in Des Moines, Polk County, you will be getting an absentee ballot application, but that's not true if you are living in another part of the state, maybe in a more rural part of the state. So that alone puts a whole lot of question marks in terms of what turnout is going to look like, right? Who gets these ballots, how many people turn them in, et cetera. It's going to be very important. But the thing that I want to leave everybody with is an appreciation for how challenging this is going to be to get the ballots actually counted on election night. Now, Colorado is a state that has all vote by mail. So voters in the state are used to the fact that, there is not a traditional election day. Most people are sending in their ballots by mail. And in some cases, it does take a little while to count all of those ballots. But in a place like Wisconsin or Pennsylvania or Georgia, places that have very little absentee ballot experience, this is going to be challenging for the state to count all those ballots. In a place like Wisconsin, for example, just about 5% of all votes are cast absentee. So now imagine that it's 85% going into November 3rd. That is a tremendous strain on all elements of the structure, the people that are conducting the elections, that are counting the ballots, and the Postal Service who's delivering it. So what I am the most concerned about is not simply that we don't have an election night that looks similar. Look, I love election night more than anybody else. I want to know who wins on election night. It's like Christmas for me. I get to open all of my presents. I want to know who wins the Senate races and House races and the White House. We might not know. And I think it's important for all of us to educate the people in our lives about that this may look very different, and that it's not for nefarious reasons. It is because of the challenge, the difficulty of going in a very short amount of time with a system that was designed in many of these states to count ballots on election day to one where most of the ballots are going to come in before election day, and to be able to verify those ballots. It will take some time to get it right. What I worry about is that in this intervening time between the election and when the election is called, that there's a vacuum, and that vacuum gets filled with a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of stuff on social media. And when I was listening to someone who has done work on helping to stop foreign interference and influence in the elections, that's what he said he is the most worried about. It's not that Russia comes in and tries to actually tamper with our voting system in the way of, literally going in and changing ballots or hacking into the voting system. They don't have to do that. What they do instead is they seed social media with inflammatory posts. And that, to me, is the biggest worry, is that regardless of what the numbers show, that you have a significant percent of the electorate that doesn't believe in the outcome. And again, for a country that is already so polarized and so riven with distrust of one another, that's a very dangerous place to be. So what I'm hoping is going to happen, and you all can be advocates for this, is to let people know that if indeed the voting is going to take place mostly by absentee or early vote, that we have to be patient. That's okay to be patient, and it's okay to wait for the final results. But at this point, it does look like the president, as I said, is in a very deep hole, and he's taking his party with him, especially those who are up for re-election in the Senate. And the advantage right now is definitely in Joe Biden's camp. And it's going to take something, I don't know what it is, to be able to turn that around from the president, but time is definitely running out. And so with that, I am very happy to take your questions.
Well, thanks, Amy. We have a lot of questions that have come
Sure.
in. I'm going to start with, given what you've just said about election eve and mail-in votings, what effect will this have on the tradition of using exit polls?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, in a place like Colorado, for example, they've been able to account for the fact that so many of the votes come in by mail that they do. It's basically like a poll that they're taking, right? They call people up and ask them, oh, have you already turned in your ballot? Okay, who did you vote for? And then that gets put into the model. It's a really good question right now that I don't know where we, for example, at the NewsHour, we're not part of the voter consortium, so I'm not privy to the conversations that are happening about the exit polls, but it certainly lends even more difficulty in trying to figure out election night. I think, again, it's going to be really important for those of us in the media to let people know that what is coming up on election night, when we put the big maps up and say, 45% of the vote is in and Donald Trump is at X and Joe Biden's at Y, that actually may not be an accurate representation of the total vote, right? That yes, 45% of the precincts that voted on election night are in, but there are still tons of ballots that have not been accounted for yet, haven't been put into the total yet.
One of the questions is, do you think the president's feud with Dr. Fauci will hurt his public approval ratings? And tied with that, another question about the Stone commutation and the probability of a Flynn pardon affecting the election and voters' opinions.
Right. So, look, the president does know one thing very well, and it's that he knows his base. And on those three issues in particular, he feels pretty strongly that his base will either support or outright cheer on what he's doing in those cases. That yes, they believe that the entire Russian investigation was part of what, as the president calls it, a hoax. And even for voters who already don't like Donald Trump, the Stone commutation is sort of par for the course, right? There's nothing particularly new and illuminating about that. I think, once again, what it does, though, is it tells those sort of voters in the middle, those voters who just quite frankly aren't paying that much attention to politics. They probably zoned out during a lot of the impeachment and Ukraine and Russia conversation. But what they do know and what they are worried about is the fact that they can't go back to work and that their kids, they don't know whether it's safe enough for them to go back to school. Look, where the president has succeeded, especially in a thing like Russia, why his numbers didn't go down in the time of impeachment or during any of these other scandals that we say, gosh, any other president, if the scandal happened to them, they would be absolutely collapsing in their poll numbers. And part of the reason that the president does not, one, as I said, he really keeps his base energized and well fed with the stuff that they do like, but also he churns up the waters, right? It's always really muddy, and it's always a question about, well, I don't really know who's telling the truth here. How do we know this is really the case? And when you have also the cable news and social media echo chamber there continuing to churn up all these questions, it makes it really difficult, even for Republicans who might be a little suspect of the president, who doesn't really love the way he behaves around issues like this, kind of stick with him, right? Like, well, I mean, I guess it's kind of bad, but who knows? Everybody has a different story in all of this. When it comes to public health, though, churning up the waters, making it more confusing, again, more opaque, is not helpful. It's not what people want. They are desperate for answers. It's a reason why you're seeing, even in states that, for example, Michigan. It was a state that I looked back in polling in January. Gretchen Whitmer, the new governor, in January of 2020, and Donald Trump had about the same approval ratings. job approval ratings. But now Donald Trump's approval ratings are deep, and they're both mediocre, like 45%. Donald Trump now has something like a 40% approval rating in Michigan, and Gretchen Whitmer's are over 50%. At one point, she was closing in on 60%. And that's because voters saw, even if things were going badly, they did think that she was at least trying to handle this crisis in a way that made them feel like, she had it kind of under control, or at least was giving them the information that they needed. That's not what this president's doing. So by trying to diffuse and distract and detach, it may keep the base with him, but he is really losing independent voters by significant margins, and you can't afford to lose that number of voters even by keeping your base.
Our system of asking questions, we have people vote, and the number one question that has a lot of people have voted for, and multiple questions on this issue. Are you concerned about the Newsweek article describing what Trump will do to stay in power after he loses the election? What should we be doing about this risk?
I'm not worried that there's going to be some sort of coup where the president is holed up in the White House and has a military surrounding and not letting anybody in on January 21st. As I said, I'm much more worried about the damage that is done to the institution of, well, quite frankly, all of our political institutions by a period of uncertainty about who won and the long-term effects that will take. And look, we know after the 2000 election, there was a lot of anger and frustration and disillusionment about the voting process, about hanging chads and Ralph Nader and the Supreme Court and the Secretary of State of Florida. But now I want you to put that on steroids. And that's what this would look like. Because again, even during that moment in time, you did not have Bill Clinton or Al Gore or George W. Bush take to Twitter and encourage the undermining, question the counting, question the validity of so much of what was happening. Now, look, it was a really political process. There's no doubt about that, and I think that is absolutely important to remember. But this would be even more dangerous because, again, if it's not just one state, but it's 3 or 4 different states, all of which are trying to get the most accurate numbers possible, and they're being undermined at every stage of the game, that's problematic.
Another question that several people like is, do you see the Lincoln Project and its relatives as potentially a significant factor in the election, or simply a significant factor in the future of the Republican Party? And another question was whether this will be the Trump Party as the future of the Republican Party.
It's a really good question. I don't think anybody knows exactly what the Republican Party is going to look like post-Trump. 2 things to me are really important. One is how engaged the president stays after the election. Again, this is not a man who likes to be in the shadows. He loves to be in the spotlight, and most likely will be. I think a lot of this is going to depend, too, on what the outcome looks like. Is it a really narrow election where Donald Trump barely loses? Is it an election, though, where it's a landslide and Trump loses by a very significant margin, huge electoral college margin, and the Senate flips by a significant margin? Is that enough for Republicans to say, okay, kind of learned our lesson, we're going to do things a little differently? Maybe. But even then, and I think this is important to appreciate, the kinds of people who have lost and would lose in this election, the people who lost in 2018, who are Republicans, the people who have retired and their seats are being filled. So the John McCains and Jeff Flakes and Bob Corkers of the world, they are the moderating influences in the party. Okay, most of the Republicans who lost in 2018 were folks who were suburban moderates, and they were replaced by Democrats. And in the case of a place like Tennessee, you had someone like Bob Corker, who was a conservative Republican, but certainly much more on the, at least on the ideological scale and on the personal behavior scale, was much more of a centrist and much more of a traditionalist. Maybe we should say that, more establishment traditionalist. The person who replaced him, Marsha Blackburn, is much more of a Trumpist. All right. So Lamar Alexander, the other Republican senator, he'll be leaving, also replaced by somebody who's likely to be much more conservative. And so what you're finding is, you know, that the people who will be left behind are going to look a lot more like those who came from the Donald Trump wing of the party than those who came from the George W. Bush or Mitt Romney wing of the party.
Another question dealing back with the voter issue is, how effective will the traditional voter suppression tactics, for example, inconvenient polling places, be during the pandemic, assuming that this is still continuing in November?
No, it's a really big concern. I mean, we saw this in Georgia, we saw this in Wisconsin. Look, again, it doesn't even have to be about suppression. It's about a fundamental challenge in voting in this moment. Number one, where you actually set up voting places. Remember, a lot of voting places are in senior homes. They're in schools. You physically, you can't do that now. So where are you going to put them? Most of the people who work in the polls are older. They don't want to work, understandably, in the middle of a pandemic. So these are real significant challenges for different states. Now, Kentucky really was a shining example. There you have Democratic governor, Republican legislature, Republicans up and down the rest of the statewide ticket or statewide officials. And they came up with a plan together, and it worked really well. They knew that they weren't going to be able to have a lot of polling places open. And so in the big cities like Lexington and Louisville, they took over the biggest space they could find, you know, these big basketball stadiums, and they divided it into multiple precincts, right? So if you were normally supposed to vote at the senior center, your precinct 622 at the senior center, well, now you're down at the whatever arena, and you go into this part of the arena. And it worked actually really well. There were not long, crazy lines. There were no big election day problems. Most people voted absentee. But what happened is it took, as if many of you have been following the Kentucky Senate primary between Amy McGrath and Charles Booker, it took days for those votes to be counted. And here's the most important thing, is that on election night, it looked like Charles Booker won. But when you counted the ballots, those that came in early, Amy McGrath won, took the lead, and then ultimately won. And that's what I mean about election night. It's not just that we won't have a winner, but that there will be an incomplete number of votes that are going to be cast. And what you're going to find is a lot of those votes are going to look like, you know, on election night, it might look like Joe Biden or Donald Trump or a Senate candidate won a state, only to find that 5 days later that person didn't. And getting people that information, that appreciation for how fluid this is going to be is so important.
Do you think it would help Biden to announce a dream team cabinet before the election?
I wonder what that would mean. What do you think? What would your dream team be, Jane?
Well, my dream team is, we want to hear what your dream team would be. Do you think by naming the kinds of people who would be
Yeah.
around him and
Yeah,
the quality of people?
I think that's important. And I think the fact, for example, that Biden had said, and this was even before the president's recent uh, dismissing of Fauci, where he said, one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to offer Fauci, that job. Like, he is in that job no matter what, like day one. That's who I'm going to go to. He is my guy. And as I said, picking a vice president will be also very important. But to say, yeah, I'm going to have people around me that are trusted, that have experience, that are listening to science and data and experts. And, when you talk to voters, even those who are wary of Biden's age, and worried that, gosh, 78, is he too old to do this? And they think, well, I do think he's going to, he'll put good people around him. All right. He has experience in putting things like this together. And so I don't know how quickly he needs to do cabinet picks, but I do think you are going to see sort of rollout in the way he did with Fauci.
Yeah, which I think will be a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
You did not comment on the state of violence in the country and some of the racism and how that will affect the vote.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that?
Yeah, sure. As I said, the two issues really roiling this country right now, the pandemic, and then, of course, the protests that we saw in the wake of the killing of George Floyd. And in both of those, the president is deeply underwater. In fact, especially on race relations, the president's approval rating is the lowest of any of the different issues. It was somewhere in the 30s. So that means that even a lot of Republicans don't think he's doing a particularly great job on handling this issue. I think what it's done, and I was looking through some polling earlier today about this, is what you noticed about where different voters shifted in their opinions of Biden and Trump in terms of their vote or their approval ratings, actually, really, of the president. For older voters, it shifted during the pandemic, right? As they watched the pandemic roll out and the president's mishandling of it, their disapproval of the president started to rise up. For younger voters, again, this shouldn't be that surprising, but as the protests started happening and you started to see the disapproval rating of Trump among younger voters go up. And so you have those two groups moving against the president in some ways for again, looking at the two different crises as being the catalyst for that movement.
How much difference, how much does campaign cash make a difference? And given how much of an advantage Trump has here?
Yeah. Well, nobody wants to have less money. That
is true.
No one's like, I don't know, I don't want more. But look, at the presidential level, I think it's pretty insignificant that there's so much money swirling around in the system that it's almost impossible for a presidential candidate to be swamped at the end of the day. Again, because and Biden has been raising a ton of money, but outside groups are in there, et cetera, et cetera. To me, the real big story is the kind of fundraising that's happening down ballot, especially Democratic Senate candidates. We saw this in 2018 where Democratic House candidates were raising so much money, especially online, that they were swamping Republican incumbents by significant amounts. And we're seeing this too in the Senate races everywhere from Maine to South Carolina. Lindsey Graham's up for re-election. He's still the favorite in that race. It's South Carolina. It's a conservative Republican state. But his challenger raised $14 million. $14 million in South Carolina as a Democrat. That is amazing. And so that's where, again, if you are a Republican incumbent and what you had counted on is, well, it's a bad environment, but I'm an incumbent and I'm going to be able to raise more money and my challenger is going to have a hard time raising that cash. That's not happening. So that's where the money difference is going to be really important.
Going back to some of the nitty gritty parts of the election, which states are least prepared to administer the 2020 election? There's been a lot written about that.
I know. I have been digging around and did some interviews in a place like Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania is a state that 5% of its vote in the last election came from absentee, so this is a very new process for them. Election night, the numbers that came out on election night, actually, there were people who were writing about it, about how Democratic enthusiasm was down because Republicans were outpolling Democrats in terms of the numbers that were coming out in the returns in different counties. But by the time the absentees were counted, it was clear that actually it was Democrats who were doing very, very well. And so the early impressions were wrong. And again, this is what I do worry about too, is you can't have an election night broadcast and say things like, well, it looks like Donald Trump's having a great night, or it looks like Joe Biden's having a great night, if you don't have all the information in front of you. So look, a number of these states, I've just been reading that Wisconsin, Fulton County, and Georgia have issued after action reports about what went wrong in their primary elections. Wisconsin, you remember those really long lines, people standing in the rain trying to vote. Georgia, 5 and 6, 7-hour lines, mostly because of equipment failure. So they have acknowledged they had a problem. They acknowledged that they need to do stuff about it. Are they going to be able to do it in time? I would hope so. I mean, that's going to be the big question there. To me, it really is just about the fact that, so many of these states just have never had to contend with the amount of votes that are going to be coming in through the mail and through a process that is, again, there are states that know how to do it. Colorado knows how to do it, but it took them a while to figure it out. It took Washington State a while to figure it out. And they had bumps along the way, but it was okay because, the entire election was not focused on that one state. But now imagine so many states trying to figure this out all at once. So I don't know that there's one state in particular, but Wisconsin stands out to me in large part because of just how acrimonious the politics are in that state and have been for so long. The legislature and the governor have a terrible relationship, and it definitely impacted the way that the primary went and how long and just how messy that primary was in large part due to the fact that the governor and the legislature couldn't get on the same page. So that's the kind of place where I'd be worried.
We're kind of running out of time here with lots of questions, but one that got a lot of votes on our system is, if you were advising Joe Biden on the selection of a running mate, what advice would you give regarding ideal attributes and or key criteria to consider? Not the person, but the kind of person.
Right. That's a good way to put that. My number one bit of advice is, don't make it harder than it needs to be. Don't try to get too cute by half. Don't try to make this complicated. Look, voters need to feel about this vice presidential nominee that, number one, they could fill the post of president at any moment. And when you're 78 years old, that is going to be the number one question, right? Is this person, if anything should happen to Joe Biden, ready to take that job? The second is a sort of a do no harm. Don't pick somebody who, while could make a big splash, is going to make it more difficult for you to reach certain voters, or really to take you off message. This is not about needing. Joe Biden doesn't need a Hail Mary. Joe Biden doesn't need to shake anything up. Joe Biden is leading by 9 points. the best thing Joe Biden has going for him is Donald Trump. And anything he does to distract from that, I would argue, is detrimental.
I'm going to sneak another question in, though.
All right, we got it.
Is there a significant number now of disaffected Republicans who would swing for Biden?
Sure, but Joe Biden doesn't need a whole bunch of Republicans. I mean, the real challenge, what Joe Biden needs and what he's getting right now, are voters who, again, are independent voters. Donald Trump won those narrowly, but he won those in 2016. He needs to get folks who, let's say in 2016, they didn't vote for Trump, but they didn't vote for Hillary. They voted third party. They wrote in somebody's name. Maybe they skipped the top of the ticket. They just disliked both of those candidates so much that they just couldn't bring themselves to vote for them. Just getting some of those folks back. I mean, you look at Wisconsin, I didn't commit it to memory yet, but you think about Jill Stein and Gary Johnson, and the number of votes that they got were much more significant than the margin between Joe Biden and Donald Trump in that state. Doesn't need to get all of those folks, but just getting a percent of those folks to come out and vote. And the other group, you could argue maybe are disaffected Republicans, but they've been disaffected for a while now, are these suburban voters, especially in big, what do we call those? Big cities, I guess. I had another word, but the inner suburbs surrounding major metropolitan areas. That these are folks who had traditionally voted Republican for years. Dallas, Houston, Orange County, California, right? The place Ronald Reagan said all good Republicans go to die. They're now voting for Democrats by a significant margin. And it kind of goes back to your earlier question about, where the Republican Party goes from here. Do these voters, right now they are Democratic voters really because of Trump. Do they stay Democratic voters when Trump's no longer in office? And so, again, what Joe Biden has going for him right now is Trump is his biggest advocate. With every day that Donald Trump is in the focus, that the media attention is on him, that helps to motivate Democrats to get out to vote. That helps to keep the Democratic Party united and unified. And it keeps the focus off of the shortcomings of Joe Biden. Joe Biden wins, that spotlight goes all onto him, and the coalition that put him in office, that's going to be challenging to keep together without Donald Trump sitting there. So that is a discussion for 2021. But it is, it's a fascinating group that we're going to be following for a long time to come.
Do you have one very quick final message for all of our participants in the seminar?
Yeah. Well, first of all,
vote.
Vote, of course. I will always say that. But, you all are so engaged, and it's so important what you're doing for the community, for the country. And I talked about this the last time that I was with you all when I was able to do it in person. But it really is trusting, our system works because people are invested in it. Our system works because people want those institutions to remain in place. They do need to change with the times, which is a lot of what the protests are about. And I think we're at a tipping point, a reckoning about so many things, not just race, but our economic system, our social, our cultural, at, again, every level. So this is who America has been. It's our resiliency, is our ability to bounce back and to evolve and change, and not get caught up in living the exact same way as we did years previous. But it also means that we have to keep those institutions healthy. We have to have people who are supporting them and continuing to stay engaged with them. So yes, voting is important, but trusting that your vote matters is also going to be very important.
Thank you so much, Amy Walter.
Yes,
Here is virtual applause. You see mine. We thank you so much for being here and joining us yet again. And I just have one announcement is I want everyone to know, and please join us, the seminars at Steamboat next week, Monday, July 20th at 5:30 Mountain Time, when Amna Nawaz, a colleague of Amy's at the NewsHour, will talk about immigration at the time of COVID, consequences for the 2020 election. We're going to be talking about the 2020 election a lot during our seminars. So thank you and good night to everybody.